This was a war of attrition game. The Celtics ran out lineups tonight, Sherrod, twice of Pritchard, Romeo, Nesmith, Grant, and Parker. Twice. They got away with it in the first quarter because Cleveland
Yeah.
was ice cold. Okay. Those guys were actually a plus. They extended the lead, believe it or not, in that first quarter, and they came in. But Udoka tried it again in the third. And again, I was pretty nervous when that happened. I was like, this doesn't feel like the right. They had to do it, but that wholesale change just felt, you know,
Yeah.
dubious. I just didn't feel great about it. And it kind of went away there. I said, you got away with it once. I don't know that it was a good idea to get away with it again. Grant, despite the fact that he hit 3 threes, was atrocious all night. He was a liability most of the night. Parker too, brutally bad. Pritchard, brutally bad in his minutes. You got some contributions from Romeo. Nesmith, again, kind of a non-factor. I mean, that whole bench unit, and again, Grant started, so technically not a bench guy, but that whole bench unit was just bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was a game where, again, just looking at the way this Cavaliers roster is constructed, you could totally envision a guy like Josh Richardson coming in and giving you like 8 or 10 points. Um, when you look at the fact that the way that Marcus Smart was really trying to go at, the smaller guard, Josh Richardson, I think would have had a little bit more success with that. Um, their bench is what it is. I mean, this is why every single player who's out with an injury or an illness or a sickness, it's not just having to replace that player, it's having to replace that player and the role that the player who's replacing them is going to leave vacant. And they don't have the kind of quality depth to just fill in the gaps like that. I mean, when you lose Josh Richardson, that means Neesmith and Pritchard are going to move up in the pecking order. But if they're not in a good flow or good rhythm, and they can't seem to get into a good flow or good rhythm on their own, they're going to struggle. You're missing Al Horford. That means you might see it, Hernan Gomez sighting, which we did. That means you're probably going to see Jabari Parker, which we did. That's not a good thing most times when you have to put those guys in the first half of games. This team has a very razor thin margin for error, illness, and sickness. And we're seeing that every now and then they can catch a break and win, but for the most part, they're going to struggle when they're missing guys. And we look at the Milwaukee game and how awesome it was. They beat the defending champs. They beat the defending champs who were without 3 of their top 4 players, and they had to do it in overtime at home. So it's great that they won that game, but when you start looking at some of the factors that put kind of lean the scale in their favor, that should have been an overtime game. That should have been a 5-10 point win for most good teams.
Yeah, and that was I'd say last night's post game was one of the roughest ones I remember because there was almost nothing to say about the game. The game was garbage. It was a flat performance, and Schroeder saved your butts, and
Yeah.
that was it. But that game was garbage. It was uninspired. There's a couple positives here and there that sprung up, but a really, really flat game. And Schroeder played out of his mind, and that's why you won that. Otherwise, that would have been a brutal loss to a really undermanned team. Cleveland's playing pretty well, but they're down players too here. It's like you
Right.
can't use the injury card. The Celtics are woefully thin. Just it's a thin team.
Yeah.
And you were hoping this year would be the year that you could get stuff out of consistency and work guys like Neesmith and Romeo into, and Romeo has worked his way into the rotation where he provides value. He's not
Mhm.
consistent on a night in, night out basis, but he's playable because he grabbed some good boards tonight. He played some really good defense. He did a couple of good things. He's a little hurried on his offense and he's not aggressive enough. Sometimes he's got to attack with the idea that I'm going to the cup. I think he
Mhm.
gets into the lane thinking, where am I going to get rid of this ball sometimes? Or he rushes his shots. He's got to play with a little bit more purpose sometimes on the
Mhm.
offensive end, but he's playable simply because of what he can do on defense. But none of these other guys are at all. At all. And so back to where you were last year, whether it's Tatum out, Brown out, Smart, who missed a chunk of time, Kemba, who played erratically, every time they were down a guy or two, as soon as you get into that bench, this stuff like this would happen.
Mhm.
It's really not sustainable. Their starting lineup's not good enough to build 25-point leads over people and then let the bench, let it eat into it. So it can't be this bad. They can't have this few contributions from the people coming off the bench.
No, no, they can't. And,
And
and I think
regressions, I think, for Nesmith and Pritchard. I think Parker's basically unplayable. I think Grant is not any better this year either. I don't know where you go here.
Well, I think for Ime, I think he's going to have to become a bit more of a micromanager of this team. I think going forward, because right now they're still trying to figure out what their identity as a team is. But if you had to look at what it's been through the course of the season up to this point, it's a team that can be anyone on any given day. But more times than not, if they get a big lead, they're going to choke it away. He's got to do a better job of managing the success that they're having in games. I think part of it is going to be he's going to have to, frankly, get out of his comfort zone and not call timeouts when you traditionally call timeouts. Like if you get a 19-point lead and then in about 90 seconds it's down to 14 or 12, call that timeout before it gets any further. He's got to figure out he's got to get a better pulse on when he needs to throw the life preserver for this team and save them from themselves and just stop play and calm their asses down or get their focus back where it needs to be. Because right now, he's doing what a lot of coaches tend to do, and that is let your players play, let them figure it out. And while I think that there's value in that, at some point, you just got to say, they ain't going to figure it out tonight. I need to help them. This is where I have to be, the hard ass and say, guys, get your asses over here. You're not focused. I didn't want to call this timeout, 90 seconds in, but we got to do it. When
Yeah.
Rick Carlisle was one of the best coaches of doing that because he knew there were a couple teams he had in Detroit that were horseshit teams, and he knew that. He micromanaged the hell out of those guys. Whenever they would get like a 7-point lead and it got down to 4, he's calling a quick timeout. And you're wondering, why is he doing that? Because he understands that his role has to be, he has to cater his role to the needs of his team at that moment. And
Yeah.
I think Ime is still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like.
He did at one point in the third that weird sequence where Schroeder hit the deck and stayed on the floor for like 35 seconds, and Marcus
Right.
is looking back at him like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, is this theatrics or are you hurt?" They
Right.
played 4-on-5. Tatum ended up taking a long 2 on that possession. Schroeder finally eventually walks up. The next time he gets the ball, he does some weird, just give me the ball, angry sort of, ISO move, pull up, contested jumper, and Ime is like, "Nope." Timeout, like on the next bucket there. Like something went awry on that sequence, and
Yeah.
evil Dennis kind of creeped in. I'm not really sure, I think,
Right.
that'll happen from time to time. So he did stop it there, but it's that late third quarter there where it just looked like, I don't know, use all your, if you want to give your guys a rest, just call timeout after timeout
Right.
after timeout and
Right.
then get them back in the game there and stop the bleeding.
Right.
And then they came back in the quarter with the same unit with Josh Schroeder subbed in, I think, for maybe Grant. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And the rest of the guys were out there. I was like, what are we doing here?
Right.
And it got away there. So it's a tough one. You can't play your starters. It's like in baseball. Your best pitchers can't pitch every friggin' game or every friggin' inning. Sometimes you got to go to the back end of your bullpen, and stuff gets away from you. This was a back end of the bullpen sort of game, and they blew the lead there before you could plug the leak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
One of the big disappointments for me has been how some of those young guys aren't making the most of their opportunities. I mean, Payton Pritchard, I think it's pretty clear he's not going to play every game. So when he does play, he needs to give Ime a reason to play him more, and he's not. And that for me has been disappointing because looking at what he was able to do in the summer, looking at some of the things he did last season, you felt optimistic that there's levels to his game that he is trending towards reaching because he works so damn hard, and he seems like a just the type of player that would make the most of his opportunities, but he's not shooting the ball well. His playmaking it feels like it's regressed from where it was last year. And defensively, he's going to have his issues and his challenges simply for just a matter of physics. I mean, he's physically not able to defend as well as you would ideally want him to. But the playmaking, the shot making, that's been the big disappointment with him. And same thing with Nesmith. Both of those guys, you look at them as players that you've tried to develop over the last year and some change so that they would get to the point where when they had an opportunity, they would not crap in the pants. And that's just not happening.